Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Darren Woolley. Darren, great to have you on the pod again.
Thanks, James, and always good to be here.
Really looking forward to today's chat. So I'll reintroduce you, Darren, for those that don't know of you or haven't listened to our episodes prior. So Darren is founder and CEO of marketing management consulting firm TrinityP3. TrinityP3 is well known to most marketers in the country, working with most of the largest advertisers in Australia to help in areas like procurement advisory, agency selection, as well as working within agency advisory as well. Last week, TrinityP3 published its 2005 State of the Pitch report. So today I wanted to have Darren back onto the pod to discuss the report and to get a handle on, I guess, how marketers can run better pitches and what the state of the pitch is in the country this year. Darren, I thought it'd be good for those unfamiliar just to, I guess, talk about what the State of the Pitch report is.
Yeah, thanks, James, because there's been a lot of discussion, particularly amongst agencies and in the industry, about the pitch is broken, I think is the worst. It's an industry that loves to catastrophize things, but there was a lot of discussion around the pitch being broken, all based on opinion. And so 18 months ago, we decided that, well, let's not just rely on opinion. Let's go to market and get some honest feedback from the agencies, giving them anonymity so that they can be honest in their assessments of the way pitches are being run. That was released last year at this time, the first round, and we've just come back with the results from the second round, which was in the second half of last year, from July to December.
Last year's report being the first one, it kind of seemed to explode, right, in terms of the traction that it got. All the industry press ran lots and lots of content and articles around it. My LinkedIn was kind of taken over with the findings and snippets and comments from yourself and others. Why do you think it got such traction?
Look, I think from an agency perspective, many agencies see pitching and new business as their lifeblood. The growth will come not just from organic growth from existing clients, but also from new clients. And it is an opportunity for an agency to get out there and compare themselves to their competitors in a pitch process. I think from a marketer's perspective, there's also interest because they're often glad handled by agencies, and there's not a lot of times where there is honest and forthright feedback. And while this feedback is not directed at any one particular marketer, it is directed at marketing, procurement, and even consultants like ourselves. Say, here are the areas where we feel you're underperforming in this process, and largely letting us down. When people talk about it being broken, no one was saying it was dead, because there will always be a need to select new agencies. But what needs to change is the way we go about that.
I've got the report in front of me, and it's an awesome read. So thoroughly recommend kind of anyone, whether you're on client side or agency side, to download the report, and we'll put a link to the report in the podcast notes. But what were the standout findings for you in the 2025 edition?
Well, I guess the disappointing thing was that things had got worse. That many of the things that we identified last time had actually got much worse. But many of those things were particularly around cost. There definitely feels to be a theme running through the response, that the focus this year was, from marketers and procurement, was finding an agency that could do more for less. And look, in the context of the economy for the last 12 months, it's not been a booming economy. There's been a huge amount of uncertainty. There's been the cost of living crisis has continued and deepened. And, I think marketers are under pressure to do more for less. So going to pitch was a prime opportunity. What that did was it moved the focus away from perhaps looking for the agency that has everything and looking for very specific capabilities and at a good price. And so what that the implication of that was that many of the other things like ESG or ESR considerations fell down the ladder of priorities, but also there was an increased demand for speed, for instance, that some of the delivery times expected of the agencies were shortened, and yet there was an increase in the number of pitches that went over time. So there's quite a lot of, conflicting data in there on one level, but I think what we're seeing is many of the problems we identified in the first report have not improved. If anything, they've got worse under the pressure of the economic considerations.
And what do you, if you're working with a client, so on the marketing side, trying to procure agency services, what advice or what perspective are you bringing when, if that is the imperative, which is, we need to do the same thing for 10% less, or let's go out and find agencies who can, like, how are you working with them to kind of steer that kind of conversation?
Yeah, we take an approach, and we always have, which is that the cost of the agency is a combination of what is it that you require the agency to do, the scope of work, and not just what services, but how many, to quantify that and really get an understanding of what will be the demands on the agency. And then look at how that is then serviced, number of people required to do that work, the skills and seniority and expertise of those people, and then the costs associated with it. So when a client says, how can we get an agency to do this for 10% less? There's a couple of ways. One is obviously do 10% less in work. The other is look for agencies that are able to bring increased efficiencies. And there's a lot of promise in the market at the moment around automation and AI, particularly helping in the Gen AI, helping in the production area, for instance.
Yeah.
Or to actually then simply look for an agency that is probably less premium, because the work you need doing is not necessarily tier one work.
Yep.
So there's a number of ways of doing it other than just screwing down the agency on their rates and fees, which is our approach. Having said that, you'll see in the document that consultant-led pitches, and not just us, there's many consultants, is actually a minority. Most of the pitches are being run by marketers, then procurement, and then consultants. So they're not necessarily taking that approach.
Yeah, and I've obviously got a bias running an agency, but and speaking to other agency owners, screwing your agency down on margin just doesn't end up getting the best result for clients. And I think I'd like to think that most in-house teams and most in-house marketers would kind of understand that, right?
You'd hope so, but the agencies themselves do a disservice, because if you're in a competitive tender, how do you know one of your competitors is not willing to put a lower price down on the table as a way of securing the business? And that's the other thing. In the last 12 months, I've had more agencies, particularly medium-sized agencies, contacting me and asking about new business opportunities, because agencies are also under financial pressure, particularly at medium size. Now, small agencies, we're talking micro businesses up to 10, 15 people, can easily flex to the changing whim of the market. But once you get to that sort of 20 to 60 people, it's much harder to flex. You have 2 or 3 clients cut their spend, suddenly you're in serious trouble. And so, there is in some ways a desperation in the market, which will drive agencies to try and buy business, because some revenue, even at a theoretical loss on paper, is better than none at all. And so in those circumstances, and so, there isn't a behavior of trying to buy it. Now, what does that do? It just makes the client go, well, agency A, really good, but they're 20, 30% more expensive than agency B. I'll put some pressure on agency A to match it, not realizing that agency B is already providing an unsustainable fee. And when I talk to procurement about it, they go, why would anyone do that? And I go, clearly you've never run your own small business. Because desperation will make an owner do all sorts of crazy things in the
Yeah.
hope that it'll keep them, that if they keep the doors open, there's hope.
Yeah.
And that's the situation.
100%. And you see it time and time again. And I think a lot of, I think it hasn't, like it clearly, you read the industry press, I speak to enough agency owners out there. It's been a tough 18 months, right? I think in-house marketers are struggling with pressure on budgets and pressure on results. I think agency owners are struggling, right, with that, that effect of budgets being pulled away and media management being pulled away. And I think a lot of agency owners will look to take on unprofitable work to kind of mask over your fixed costs, and you're delaying making difficult decisions around resourcing and the like. Do you think you mentioned kind of ESG and some of those social things being less of a focus this year? Do you see that as being kind of like the classic, airlines will put the offsetting of, emissions onto every checkout, and when it comes to the crunch, people won't check the box? Or do you see it as more of a macro, changes in the US political landscape, meaning that a lot of those frameworks are being dismantled and deprioritized?
Yeah, and you have to remember this was between July and December last year. Okay,
Yeah.
so we had the US election, and so I think it's a mixture of both. One, I think it's deprioritized because largely the previous report, it was being driven by procurement, and those levels have dropped by about 50%. The number of procurement pitches that have required compliance, and that's the thing, is for procurement, these are risk mitigations. They are really checking that the agency is doing something about it. Okay, so that's decreased the number of, but I think not because necessarily the global political swing away from more social responsibility, but more the fact that pricing and cost became more of a focus. So it's almost like we need the best price, irrespective of if they comply with these things, is more of the mechanism I think we're seeing. However, it will be interesting in the next 12 months to see what happens there, because there is definitely a major move away from that, particularly in the US. We've seen Accenture Song, for instance, withdraw from a government pitch in the UK because to comply with being able to get government work in the US, they've dropped most of their DE&I, which is what's required to get government work in the UK.
It's really, really interesting. You had a great line last year, which was around marketers are boiling the ocean in search of the right agency. And I think one of the key lines this year is marketers are still boiling the ocean in order to get to the right agency. Can we maybe unpack that dynamic and what you're kind of seeing?
Yeah, so one of the issues that makes it incredibly difficult for marketers when they go to market is, where do I get information about what's available in the marketplace? Agencies have a website. They are occasionally on directories, for instance. They will do some promotion for themselves, though agencies are not particularly good at promoting themselves. I mean, I always find it interesting, the little exercise of putting Sydney digital agencies into Google and seeing how many paid search results there are for that. But that's not really helping in the selection of an agency. So marketers will often then think about the agencies they've worked with previously. They'll ask colleagues. They'll end up with a long list. They'll end up with a long list of potential agencies, which they'll then take into a pitch. Now, it's fine if you start off with a long list, but very quickly filter through that, either through conversations with each agency or taking a meeting with them and asking them some questions, and get that down to 3, maybe 4, to then do a deeper dive. But we're still seeing 6, 8 agencies being taken all the way through the process. And that's a lot of time and effort that's being invested by those agencies, because the marketers or procurement are unable to filter through it. I think, this is where a good consultant, and, without sounding like self-promotion, but a good consultant is constantly making themselves aware of what's available And that's a job in itself, because we're looking at thousands. I saw a report the other day in the UK. They're talking about over 200,000 agencies in the United Kingdom.
That's insane.
And 59% are micro businesses of less than 3 people.
Yeah. Still a lot. That's a lot of agencies with more than 3 people, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. What and why does that matter to a marketer? Why does it matter if I drag, and as an agency owner, I've got a very strong perspective on this, but why does it matter if I'm dragging 8, 10, 12 agencies through this process?
Okay. There's a logical reason, and then there's an emotional. Let me give you the logical first. The more choice you give yourself, the more likely you are, particularly if there's a group of you making a decision, of making the wrong decision. And the way that works is that if there's more than 2 of you, so 3 or more people are choosing an agency, and we've got 8 different choices, then we're going to end up with the one that's most popular, not necessarily the one that's best. It's just the way that choice works when you've got multiple people. That's the logical reason. The more you can filter down and filter out the ones that are less appropriate, the better. The emotional reason is, and you'll see it particularly in this report, and I'm not sure whether it's the agencies are more comfortable after the last one, but the commentary was particularly biting, and there was a high level of resentment and anger aimed at the marketers that showed disrespect, that didn't get back to them, that left them hanging for ages. Now, the more agencies you have involved, the more people you're going to piss off when you don't choose them. And the more people you're going to have to phone and have that awkward conversation with. And in fact, there's even one quote in there where the person is so angry, they talk about never, ever doing business with those senior people again. It becomes very personal. It's not like they hate the brand, because they know the brand will change. Marketers come and go. But those individuals that treated them with such disrespect, they'll remember and avoid it like the plague. And you wouldn't want to be that marketer, would you? That a large group of people in your industry start to not have any respect for you because they feel you've shown no respect to them.
Yeah, I was definitely keen to get your perspective on that. And I do feel like, sitting on the other side of the fence, if we get an RFP or a tender, and we just feel like we're there to kind of make up the numbers or whatever it might be, we will ask pretty pointed questions around how many other agencies are going to be participating and whatever else. And if it does feel like it's a field of many, we'll often just not be willing to engage. And I would suspect that quite often we would be the best placed agency to win that work, right? So I'm not even convinced that you necessarily, sometimes you might be shooting yourself in the foot by putting a process together where the agencies don't feel like they're a chance.
Well, look, I actually think that agencies should do more of what you're doing. Okay. Yeah, we were invited to tender for quite a significant government contract. And I asked the question, how have you gone about selecting who to invite? Because it wasn't an open tender, it was an invitation tender. And they said, we've just collected a large group of, and I said, look, I'll look at it. But ultimately, we declined the opportunity because it was clear that this was just a fishing exercise. They were going to market, and they wanted a complete RFP response as part of that. If I think if a client phoned me and said, look, we're not sure, we've got a list of half a dozen, what we're going to do is meet with all of you and then invite 3 of you to tender, I'd be very open to it.
Yeah.
But this idea that, well, I've got a big long list, I'm not going to tell you how many, you've got to put hours and hours of work in to fill in my form, which doesn't really get to the crux of whether we can do it or not. And then I'll choose. I'm not going to play that Russian roulette.
Yeah. And we love that touch point as an agency. I guess if, for marketers listening, just being able to have that 45-minute, 1 hour session, it's probably not a full-blown chemistry session, but just the chance to ask questions both ways. What are you trying to achieve here? Get some background, get relationship, right? I think often the benefit is just a chemistry thing, right? Like, do I actually want to work with these people? Do I like them? And as an agency owner, so happy to invest that time with a couple of members of the team and myself. Is this going to be a fit? And I think often when you're held at arm's length and you do feel it's this process with lots of agencies, you also don't get the information you need in order to properly respond. So I think you also end up coming back with a pretty half-baked response to whatever the tender might be.
Or the other thing, James, is when you do ask a question and then you find out they've shared your questions with all the other tenderers, and you're like, well, did they even think of asking that question?
Yeah.
And are you just sort of leveling the playing field to the point where no one can demonstrate an advantage because you're treating everyone as if they're the same? You know, a lot of what agencies bring to the relationship is their intellectual curiosity and knowledge. And in asking questions, particularly ones that go to, you know, strategy and insight, sharing that is just ridiculous. And yet procurement do it as a routine.
Couldn't agree more. You mentioned some of the kind of the quotes which are on the first page of the report, and there's some great quotes there, right? Pitches have become a total lottery. You just hope that what you present resonates. We've had enough feedback this year. The work was too sophisticated, wasn't sophisticated enough. The market and we are suspicious that the result was predetermined. The pitch was a farce. The client took a long time to issue the brief, resulting in very little time actually to answer it. Agencies were given a presentation slot of 40 minutes and back-to-back time slots for 6 agencies on the same day. Feedback was only provided when asked for, and the award was based on cost, not quality of work. I think it's such a good opportunity because there is a divide, right? And I totally get the challenges that the marketers also are having in-house, right? And the pressures on them. But I think it is such a good report in terms of bringing together two perspectives, right, that are often quite opposing. But we're trying to achieve the same thing in many instances.
And look, these are verbatim. You know, the only thing, if there's any editing, it's because occasionally they'll actually name someone, and we don't want to get into a shouting match about who did what. So, you know, there is a little bit of editing to protect the guilty or the accused, let's say.
The accused. So what, I guess in terms of the nuts and bolts of the report, like are agencies pitching better in 2025? The clients managing the pitch process more effectively?
So timing-wise, it's interesting, you know, and I touched on this a minute ago, but the amount of time given to agencies has tightened. You know, whereas it would be often 3 to 4 weeks, it's now 2 weeks or 1 to 2 weeks, which is interesting, you know, because sometimes agencies like to keep things moving and have momentum. But then the other thing that's happened is the overall time of the pitch is being more inclined to drag on beyond the expected end date. So we've got 2 mechanisms here. One is marketers are asking the agencies to respond faster, but then the marketers themselves are often taking longer. And that touches on another point that came out in this report that we didn't have previously. And that is there seems to be an increased involvement of senior management at a local level or global management for regional and global pitches. They're getting involved in the pitch, not up front, but during the pitch process, which is causing the marketers to then have to pause the pitch while they get the senior management up to speed and then listen to any concerns they have and then go back into the pitch process. Now, I think any agency would love the idea of a CEO being involved in the selection process, but you would hope that they're involved in having input from day one and not getting involved halfway through and completely upsetting the cart.
I was actually listening to your podcast this morning, Darren, the TrinityP3 podcast on my drive to work, as I sometimes do, and it was, you weren't hosting it, but your colleague was, and on market mix modeling, and I forget his name, but one of the co-founders of Mutinex, he was talking about this increased speed that is put on marketing teams, kind of that has increased over recent years. And I can't help but think that a lot of it, you know, we are dealing with kind of difficult economic times, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. So I can kind of imagine that the pressure, the microscope, more senior stakeholders, people from different parts of organizations wanting to be involved in these decisions, and, you know, it's kind of the expenditure related to but then when things are uncertain, I think we delay decisions and we don't want to make the wrong decision. And I can't imagine those two forces are kind of at play for those two changes in turnaround time on pitches. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing is, and we're all aware of this, technology is driving speed. And when the economy's tough, you're more inclined to move to performance focused, where you're going for sales or leads rather than building brand.
Yep.
The long and the short of it gets out of balance because the economic imperative to drive revenue to support getting a budget next year becomes the overriding driver. Agencies, and this is not in the report, but is of concern to us, because the talk about automation and AI speeding up the process and making it cheaper. So the idea that it can be cheaper and faster at the same time is appealing, obviously, to marketers and procurement, because it's about doing things faster, but also saving money. And I'm concerned because what it doesn't allow for is the significant investment in time and money an agency needs to undertake to actually make that work. This is not as simple as just getting a subscription to an OpenAI chatbot. There's actually processes that need to change. There's security that has to be checked. There's intellectual property. There's a whole lot of issues that have to be dealt with before an agency is even close to being able to deliver the benefits. And then add a significant financial investment that the agency would then need to recoup, whether it's an independent or a network agency. The networks have come out sprouting figures like $300 million plus on a global basis. It can be as significant for an independent agency in one market. It could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in time and out-of-pocket costs to achieve the same type of thing, which is money that has to be recouped.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned that the focus on time and money is being done on the basis that the supplier will just find a way to meet it, rather than the marketers entering into a conversation, or procurement entering into a conversation on how can this be delivered in a sustainable way. Because ultimately, if it's not sustainable, everyone's going to be disappointed. And we're already hearing from the market of clients that have bought the dream only to be disappointed because the reality was quite different.
Yeah. And how much of a like both in the report and maybe just what you're seeing out there, how much of it is being driven by marketers, procurement, kind of reading the buzz, dealing with AI in their own personal and professional lives, therefore going to agencies and saying you should be able to do this in 20% less time or half the less time? Or how much of it is being driven by agencies coming in and selling the dream of efficiency and AI?
It's the agencies largely driving it. Clients, marketers are definitely interested, but they also, most of them are aware that it comes with risk issues. So it's the agencies, as an industry, we've always jumped on the shiny new thing, as a way of giving us some sort of differentiation. Just look at the number of consultants that have sprung up in the last 2 years around helping agencies embrace, and marketing teams embrace AI. It's a new growth area because it is new.
Yeah.
And yet I'm not seeing enough of the industry conversation, or even the agency to client conversation, because agencies will often, in the same way as they'll discount fees to win, they'll make promises. And we saw it, I think the last great one was the dashboard. Do you remember when every agency would offer their client a dashboard?
Yeah.
And it would be at no cost, free to you, and it will be ready in months. And after appointment, 12 months later, there was still no dashboard, and there was talk of $100,000 fee to set one up.
Yeah, right.
It's the same type of behavior. I think we need to apply some maturity to this and talk about, yes, it can be done. Here's what's involved. Here's the costs involved. We need to recoup those. And then it's not just a set and forget. There's an ongoing need to update, pay licensing fees, build technology as it improves.
And I do feel that there's this almost kind of a vulnerability where if as an agency or an agency owner or you're working in an agency, if you don't kind of come in with, yeah, we're using AI for all these things and it's changed everything, that you're kind of missing the boat a little bit, because we all sit there on LinkedIn and the last week has been all about how we can now just create ads with a simple prompt and the push of a button.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like our copy teams have grown massively since the popularization of ChatGPT. Yes, every single member of our team are using AI in different ways, but the team's busier than ever. It's kind of, they're very powerful tools, which essentially are efficiency tools, but that we all have access to the same tech in most instances, and it just means the bar's increased, right? And what we use our time for then
Absolutely.
is different. It's yeah.
It is symptomatic, though, of the situation agencies find themselves in trying to differentiate themselves by embracing the latest technology, the latest fad. And I use fad not because it is a fad. It's going to make fundamental changes to the way we do business. But this early on, it's still, we're still at the infancy stage. It takes, and we're trying to change a process that has been very human centric for decades into one that's more automated. It's going to take time.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the future promise is clearly there, and there's lots of work that can still be done. But I think the gap at the moment, but the gap between the two is larger than I think people like to admit. What was your biggest surprise out of this report compared to last year?
Look, the surprise was there wasn't improvement anywhere. And that's sad. I mean, I feel like same but worse is not the news that I was hoping it would be.
I've got a quote here from you in the industry press. This is more pessimistic and nothing worth celebrating.
Exactly.
Darren Woolley, TrinityP3.
Well, because you would think with so much focus on pitching, but the trouble is the people that are suffering mostly are the agencies, and they're not empowered to actually change the marketers. The change is going to come from marketers. When marketers start to want to do pitching in a better way that has less negative impacts on their agencies, when they want to start customizing their pitch to what they're actually doing. I mean, we're still seeing, even in this report, pitches for between 100 and 250,000 in fees going to a full creative pitch with full creative, speculative creative work done. Now, that's just ridiculous. I mean, there is no way an agency can recoup the cost of participating in that pitch in the first year.
Yeah.
Right? So you're working for nothing for the first year. And yet there are so many ways that you could do a pitch, and for a small project like that. First of all, make a short list, meet with the agencies, get them to present a couple of case studies in that meeting of similar work that they've done for other clients, and then get some references from some of their clients and have a very honest conversation with those marketers around what it's like to work with those agencies. It has very little impact on the agencies. You largely know your budget. So you can then share that with the agency and ask them, what could they achieve for that sort of budget as an indicative, so that you see what the value would be. And that's all done. It can be done in 3 or 4 weeks. No major out-of-pocket costs for the agency apart from some time.
Yeah.
But has all of the due diligence and governance that a full creative pitch does. Because the problem with speculative creative, and I had this conversation only in the last couple of weeks with a client, because they said, "Oh, we said to them, we don't want the agencies to do any creative work." And they said, "Well, how will we know if they can do it?" And I said, "How do you know now? Just because they're presenting the work doesn't mean it's theirs." Many agencies use the large body of freelancers to do creative work. It may not be done by the agency. How do you know they developed the strategy first and then did the creative? This is not a great way to test an agency. It's a great way to buy an idea if all you're buying is that idea. But it's not a great way to actually test if an agency has the strategic creative ability to come up with lots of ideas over the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, that's it. I did like in the report you kind of, because I'm not convinced that marketers would be across the dynamics necessarily, but I think you put in there that the average profit margin of a well-run agency will be 15%, right? And if you're expecting, if the total of the project is 100 to 250K, you're kind of looking at $15,000 to 30, 40 grand profit that agency will make from that project. And then if you kind of unpack the
cost of the
cost for the pitch, and then if you multiply it out 6 times for 6 different agencies, the money being lost by the agency world over that.
But why do agencies do it, James?
Well, we try really hard not to, right? Like I think we try really hard to ascertain what's behind the pitch. Is it already predetermined? What's happening with the incumbent? Is it work we actually want? Are these the types of people we want to work with? We're so happy to, and I think that we're probably a little bit more, not fortunate because I think we work hard on it, but I think we often have more opportunities for work than we can practically deliver. So we do have a bit more control over saying no, or we're not interested. But I think your point before is right. If I'm running a 30-person agency and I've just lost my 2 biggest accounts, and then someone comes in with a shiny RFP for $250,000 worth of work or $1 million worth of work, what am I going to do? Am I going to throw the kitchen sink at it, or am I going to politely decline? Like it's hard, right? I think it is. A lot of it's based on the agency and how much, I guess, strength they have and courage, and how their bottom line's looking and what the budget looks like.
Yeah, there was one of those quotes, a repeated comment from big global brands. Thought we'd just see what's out there, right? I mean, this is an incredibly expensive way to go and find out what's out there.
Yeah.
There are so many other ways to do that.
Yeah.
And so, it's almost negligent to actually go to market, invite a whole lot of agencies to come and present and participate in an RFP just to find out what's out there.
Yeah. And I'd argue that, and I think it depends. I think if you are getting to contracts that are $1 million to $10 million and the pitch team is, has tens of hours of work to put into a piece of creative, this might be different. But I would argue that the idea of going out to multiple agencies for some work that's $100,000 to $500,000 and saying, pitch some ideas at us, I'd argue that those ideas themselves
are not worth it.
They're not worth it, right? They're not going to be the best ideas that team would actually deliver if they had, the certainty of the full budget and the full allocation of hours. So I think you're actually potential, and it's like the candidates that are excellent at job interviews, but not necessarily great once they start work. It's the same thing, right? You're going to get an agency, to your point, that might pull in a freelancer to put something pretty shiny together, or if you're going to engage 6 agencies, one of them might just put together something you like, but is that agency necessarily the best one to deliver longer term? Probably not, right?
Well, one of the things that we do is we often organize workshops where the marketing team and each agency individually gets to work with the client. And, when we introduced those almost 2 decades ago, the marketing teams thought it was terrific because it was as close to a test drive as you could get. It took it away from being a presentation to working together in a workshop for, 4 hours or 7 hours or whatever the length of the workshop was. Interestingly, the agencies loved it as well because they got to test drive the client.
Yeah.
They got to see which were the good clients, which were the good thinkers, who was open to new ideas, who was more cautious. And so for both parties, this idea of getting to test drive each other was incredibly valuable. Now, it's only worthwhile if the size of the prize justifies spending a day in a workshop and the prep work that you need to do it. But in many ways, an agency will spend less time doing that than they will developing a whole creative response, because it's often done in isolation, and agencies will spend a lot of time second thinking and questioning themselves on what they should be presenting.
Yeah, 100%.
In a workshop, you're just getting instant feedback.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about that approach is much harder to fake, right?
Oh yeah.
I think sitting on my side, and it's easy is not the right word, but the idea of putting together a nice shiny deck that you then, sit with the people in your agency that communicate the best and can kind of talk to and whatever else and sell in the value, versus actually having the team members that are going to be on the tools and they're going to be client facing, sitting in a room, answering questions on the fly. I think if I was looking to purchase, I know which approach I'd rather rely on to give me a good idea of what it's actually going to be like to work with this agency, right?
And marketers say they want that. They say we don't want the A team to present to us. And yet they'll often want to defer to a presentation, because it does take a level of maturity to be willing to put your team and an extended team into a room with an agency where the agency will be asking questions of you. And in fact, I remember very early on, before this became our sort of more regular way of running a pitch, one agency who was very good at presenting, we had a full day, 7-hour workshop. The first 3 hours, they presented beautifully. There was a lunch break. And then they came up to us and said, so what do we do now? And we go, it's a workshop. What would you do? We've never done a workshop before. And I go, come on. So, you stop getting the A team because, to your point, you can present for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
You can't fake a full day.
Yeah. Problem solving, digging into what you've done for other clients. And I love it. What's the one change that you would love to see in the 2026 report?
I'd like clients to be more respectful with their soft skills. I would love them to improve the level of open communication, both at the start of the process, right through the process, and at the end. I think the thing that really irks, upsets, infuriates agencies is being ghosted or feeling like they're being ghosted. And let's use this as the metaphor is, I invite you to a party, James, and you accept and you come along, and then the whole night, every time you talk to me, I just turn my back and walk away and ignore you. And that's how they feel. And then suddenly you realize the party's over, but no one even said goodbye to you.
Treating me mean to keep me keen, Darren. I'd come back to the party the next weekend.
Well, but that's what it's, when you think about it, inviting an agency to participate, then not responding or responding in the coldest way possible, mechanical way possible. And then providing no feedback or no direction other than do this, do that.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, making a decision to end the process and not even tell the agency why it's ended or what they could have done better for next time. It's just rude. And that I've made it very stark there. I'll acknowledge that. But that's how the agencies feel. And out of that, you start getting agencies believing, it was all a setup anyway, it was rigged, such and such new, in the vacuum of knowledge and information you've created, the agencies start filling it with the sorts of rumors and ideas that are incredibly damaging to your professional reputation. So I'd like to see that improved and stop doing it.
It's a great answer.
Taking responsibility for the process that you instigated.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And don't tell us we came second. Like, just give us actual feedback on what you liked about us. And I think humans struggle with giving direct feedback, right? I think people generally don't like to let people down, but I think it's that gap that does create all of that kind of the murmurings and the negativity, right? Which is, if you actually just give me good constructive feedback on where we're awesome, where in your eyes we weren't a good fit, it helps you the next time, right?
Yeah, well, we use radical candor. The first step of radical candor is to get permission from the person to give them feedback.
Yeah.
And then be respectful but honest, very, bluntly honest, so that there is no confusion. The problem is sugarcoating it will often then lead to more confusion and doesn't come across as being authentic, which then makes the other person think they're hiding something. I think there was a quote in there this time, which is the agency told that they were close second, and then they checked with the other two agencies on the pitch and they were both close second because the client hadn't appointed anyone.
I did read that and had a chuckle.
So stop doing it, please, marketers. Stop doing it.
Now, Darren, we're close to wrapping up the conversation, and what I wanted to pilot today with yourself was a lightning round.
Okay.
So
I've got my buzzer.
I like this is a new format for the show. One word to describe the pitch process in 2025.
Flawed.
The worst pitch practice still happening today.
Too many agencies.
The best pitch you've ever seen and what made it great. You don't necessarily have to mention any brand if you don't wish to, but
a very focused marketing team who didn't want to waste their time and therefore didn't want to waste the agency's time. So we got it done very quickly.
I like that. And this doesn't have to relate to the pitch process. What's the one best piece of marketing advice that you'd give to an in-house marketer?
Always be very clear of what success looks like for you and the timeline you want it delivered by. No matter what you're doing, always know what you want.
Darren Woolley, thanks for coming back onto the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks, James.